So, this is the place. Nice.
Yes. Must you be dressed so indecently?
This is my usual outfit, buddy.
Quite. No matter, go inside and begin teaching your class.
Settle down now, mortals. I said settle down, you little shits! Now, I'm your new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher.
I haven't heard that one before.
I heard that, you little fuck!
That's the point. Why would you have me do this voice cameo if you couldn't hear me?
Don't make me come over there! So Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for the original PlayStation is... Yes,
What does this have to do with the class?
everything. Trust me, I'm an expert.
In Defense Against the Dark Arts?
No. Licensed video games, my dear wizards and witches.
Licensed games?
Yes. Now pay attention. Let's watch a video.
This doesn't sound good.
Welcome back, mortals. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for the original PlayStation, known as Sorcerer's Stone in America, is the 2001 video game adaptation of the first book in the Harry Potter series, which was originally published in 1997. This book also had a film adaptation in 2001, the same year as the game. And no, despite the subtitle, none of these have anything to do with Fullmetal Alchemist, outside of both stories having red stones called the Philosopher's Stone. I promise I'll get to Fullmetal games one day, but that day is not today. Now, I have a good amount of nostalgia for a vast majority of the Harry Potter games. It's most of the motivation behind making this video series. And yes, it will be a series. And returning back to this game in particular after all these years was fascinating. And kind of an enjoyable experience. Honestly, I expected the game to be a lot worse going into it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think the game is all that great either. I should also mention that this game, like most other Harry Potter games, was published by EA Games. The challenge is everything. That said, this game and its sequel on the same console were actually developed by Argonaut Games. That name you may be familiar with, because they have developed a couple other games, such as Croc Legend of the Gobos. Gobos? I've never played it. A surprisingly good Emperor's New Groove game. Birds of Prey, no, not that one. And Scooby-Doo Mystery, holy crap, I hate this damn dog so much. So how I went about playing this game, I want to explain first, because that was a trip in and of itself. See, I bought an original copy on PlayStation, complete in box too, for like $10. And I was just gonna play it on my trusty PS2, but for some strange reason, the component cables I use for my PS2 don't show picture for PS1 games. They work perfectly fine for PS2 games, they still work just fine for PS2 games, but PS1 apparently is where it draws the line, and I don't know why. Obviously, my next thought was to use an actual PlayStation with component cables, but that yielded similar results, with the only real difference being that the disc spinning was louder now. Then I decided to go to Calvin's room and borrow his PS3, hook that up to my TV via HDMI cable, and play it that way. My TV, apparently, was set up to a completely different resolution, and I didn't exactly know how to change that. So I then switched to my only other TV, my computer screen. This, thankfully, worked out excellently, but leads to the first thing of note about this game. Since I was playing the game on the PS3 via backwards compatibility, there are some oddities that I doubt would have happened on original hardware. For starters, load times are basically non-existent, and I can't exactly test to see if loadings would be slower on PS1 or PS2, but I assume that's the case. Also, the only time any sort of frame rate drops happened was the one time I went into the Grand Hall to grab some every flavor beans. It chugged really badly in there, and I assume it's because of all the floating candles. Otherwise, the game ran smoothly and I didn't experience any actual input delay. At least none that made the gameplay experience any worse, so that's what matters. Now that I've gotten all that out of the way, I want to get the meme part of this game out of the way. You know, the part you've all seen already. This game looks rough. It arguably looks like ass. And I mean, it looks bad. Just awful in places, too. The character models are all jagged and low poly. Character faces look low quality. Some of them even look just straight up uncanny and terrifying, such as Professor Quirrell. While others look kind of hilarious, like Ron having this Sigma Chad smirk permanently attached to his face. Or Draco, who just constantly looks like he's smelling the worst shit imaginable the entire game. Of course, the crowning achievement for the character models in this game have to be the legend himself, PS1 Hagrid. You all know who I'm talking about. It's just so fantastically funny in how awkward and low poly it is that I am not surprised that it became a meme. The environments are fine, I guess. They're better than the character models, but they still don't look too much better. There's that typical PS1 warping that you'd expect, and Hogwarts just doesn't feel as large as it's supposed to. It doesn't even really feel like a castle in the real sense. It just feels like a castle-themed area with levels. It doesn't feel like a place that exists. Something both the books and the movies were really good at was making Hogwarts feel like a place that could exist within this world. This game doesn't capture that. And speaking of the things that this game does worse than its source material, the way this game goes about presenting the story of the first book is, well, sloppy is the word I'd use to describe this game's storytelling. At multiple points in the story, it felt like certain events just happened because, oh, well, that's what happened in the book, but it doesn't feel natural or right. The best example of this, I feel, is when Draco steals Neville's Remembrall. Draco steals the Remembrall after Neville is utterly bodied by his runaway broom, which prompts Harry to try and take it back from Malfoy. It's a simple scene that's supposed to set up the fact that Draco's kind of an asshole and Harry's a good boy with a good heart. This, of course, leads to the scene where Harry and Draco fly off despite their teacher's orders to do exactly the opposite and stay seated until she got back. This little scuffle on brooms ends with Harry taking back the Remembrall and conveniently flying in front of McGonagall's window, which is how she sees this whole thing go down. This is important. This then leads to her suggesting Harry to Oliver, head of Gryffindor's Quidditch team. In the book, it's basically the exact same, except Neville's significantly less bodied by the broom. They kind of made it more over the top in the movie, which makes sense. Now in the game, however, Neville just sort of runs up to Harry and cries about Draco stealing the Remembrall, which he needs. And Harry follows him. Scene cuts to black, and the next scene we see Draco and Harry are just on their brooms out of nowhere. And this brings about a gameplay section where you chase Draco while avoiding his attacks and obstacles so you can bash into him a couple times. Of course, bashing into a couple times leads to you defeating him, and after you beat Draco and get the Remembrall back, McGonagall just sorta walks up to Harry and tells him that the Quidditch game is about to start. And then you're forced to immediately go and do that. It completely cuts out the scene with Oliver and the part of the movie and book where Harry learned how to play the game. It's such a weird and clunky scene. Like, how did McGonagall see any of that happen? There's no evidence in the game to suggest that she had any opportunity to see it going down, and we never see her during the mini boss fight, I guess. The setting of the original conflict is so crucial to that because it allows her the perfect view to see what's happening. And the game changed that, I assume, for a more comfortable gameplay experience, but at the cost of the narrative making less sense. Also, she just walks up to Harry and throws him into a Quidditch game without warning. Dude doesn't even get enough time to actually learn any of the rules. I mean, I'm willing to give this point some leeway because earlier in the game, Hagrid gives you a Quidditch book. But since you never leave Harry's perspective and are almost always in control of him, you know he was just doing other stuff in the game and had no time to actually read that book. And after the Quidditch game, Snape takes the book away from you, then gives you a mini lecture about how you shouldn't take library books without permission or whatever. So, we never got a chance to actually read it at all. This is all just like an example of my biggest problem, and the reason why I don't like how this game handles the story. It glosses over several key parts of the plot to make sure that the game's pace is quick, because it's a game. But it loses a lot of the context. If you hadn't seen the film, or better yet, even read the book, you'll be lost. And it kind of just expects you to have gone into the game with the knowledge of this plot already from the original source material. And I don't think that's a good thing, personally. The game is, in a lot of ways, an adaptation of the book in its own right. There are several things in this game that contradict the film adaptation, and to me say that the game was probably taking more cues from the book because they probably didn't have access to the movie when developing it. That's my assumption anyway. And as such, I feel like this game should have done a bit more to stand on its own as an adaptation. There are storybook cutscenes that try to add a bit more context, but those cutscenes just kind of feel like SparkNotes versions of the narrative rather than the narrative on its own. On the subject of broomsticks, by the way, since I mentioned the Draco section, let's talk about the gameplay a little. Now, for starters, Harry's regular movement's fine. I honestly expected it to be really clunky. I remembered it being kind of awkward to play, but it was pretty alright. Like, Harry felt pretty clean and fine to run around. And I never found platforming or moving to be stiff or uncomfortable at all when playing through the game. That might have been because I was using a PS4 controller on a PS3, but I'm not entirely sure. On the broomstick side of things, since that was my segue, at first I felt like it was clunky and awkward. Exactly what I feared going into the game. But after going into the options, I discovered that you can reverse the up and down movement while on the broom. And after changing this, I felt way more comfortable. And I no longer had any issue. It was great. I didn't even realize this was an option, and I had had this game as a child. I really wish the game would open asking you what you would prefer, or do something to give you the indication that, you don't have to play this game with inverted up and down controls. But at least the option's there at all. There are so many games, especially from around this time, that just have inverted up and down controls when flying and give you no option to change it. Quidditch is fine. You don't actually play Quidditch in the main game. I mean, you're supposedly playing Quidditch, but you're not. The entire time the Quidditch game is going on, you're just chasing the snitch as you fly through rings to increase your speed before being tossed into the catch the snitch minigame, where you need to time pressing the X button just right that you can clasp your hand around the snitch. Honestly, once I fixed the flying controls, this was actually kind of fun. It's simple, yeah, but I like it. I like flying around the arena, I like catching the snitch, and that tense moment when you're trying to time your catch just right to capture the snitch is just intense enough to feel right. It captures the feeling from the original book and film where Harry is reaching for the snitch with all of his heart, trying to win the game, his first Quidditch game. And it's cool. It's a shining moment in the game for me, despite how simple it was handled. On the other hand, the way the game handles the spells is just serviceable at best. It's not ideal. First of all, you have Flipendo, which is a name we'll be hearing a lot as we dive down this rabbit hole of Harry Potter games because it's in almost all of them. Almost all of them. This is the basic attack. You hit X to fire the spell, or you hold down X to charge it up. Near the end of the game, if you collect enough beans, you'll actually get an upgraded Flipendo, which I assume is more powerful, but I didn't get access to it till right before the final area of the game, so I really couldn't tell. It does change the color from blue to red though, so that's neat. Other spells you get are Incendio, a spell used to burn things, which requires a button-pressing, timing-based mini-game to activate, which is, for some reason, also on a time limit. Yeah, this game's kind of obsessed with time limits, and you'll figure that out very quickly as we continue through, and I don't know why. There's also Wingardium Leviosa, which is used to lift objects. And you can only lift objects for a certain amount of time because there's a time limit. Like I said, this game's sort of obsessed with time limits. There's Vertimilius, a spell used to light the darkness, that is literally used to turn intangible platforms tangible for a limited amount of time. This was, at least in the main game, only used twice. If we don't count the time you have to use it during the class you learn it in, because then that would be 3 times. It is so underutilized, especially when compared to spells like Wingardium Leviosa. No, I'm not doing the joke again. And Incendio. And then Avifors, Avafor. Look, when I wrote the script, I knew how to say it. It's been a while. I don't remember how to say the spell. This spell is used just as often as Vertimilius, and it has just as many uses, i.e. 1. This spell is a transfiguration spell that you only use to turn giant stone owl statues into tiny yellow birds so that the tables they're on can float up and be used as lifting platforms. It's used 2 times in the main game that I can immediately recall. I had just beat this game when I wrote the script, so I assume that was based on memory. Looking back on it now that I'm recording, I can only remember 2 sections still. And again, that's not counting the time you use it in the class when you learn it. The 2 times I remember are once right outside the classroom to get to the upper levels of that part of the castle, and another in the next room over to get to an upper level that starts your race against Peeves. Hey, remember Peeves, a character the movies removed? He was from the books. On the subject of the spells, you learn them by going to classes. Each class requires you to race to the classroom under a time limit. Of course, if you make it in time, you're fine, and you even get some house points. But if you don't, well then you lose house points. Because apparently punishing the whole class for the actions of one student isn't just a thing done in Muggle schools. Once in class, you will always do a Simon Says type minigame where you hit buttons in a certain pattern as instructed to learn the spell. Which is funny to me, honestly, as these sections have no time limit, so you could, in theory, hold up the class for as long as you want. The sections aren't super hard. I did mess up a handful of times, but I was never held up for so long that I got frustrated. A good percentage of the game is like this, actually. Fairly easy most of the way through with a few things I have to retry a couple times, but nothing super difficult that held me up for too long. Except for it. It being Gringotts. Single-handedly, the lowest point of the game, and one of the most frustrating sections of any game that I have ever played. If you are watching this video and have played Sorcerer/Philosopher Stone on the PlayStation 1, you know why I say this. But for the people in the audience who haven't had the unfortunate displeasure of having to play through Gringotts, let me explain. Near the end of the game, you go to Diagon Alley with Hagrid to get stuff for his dragon, Norbert. You remember Norbert, right? Before you can buy anything, you have to go to the bank while Hagrid goes off to get plastered. That isn't like a YouTuber joke. He seriously says he's going to the pub to knock back a few butterbeers. He has essentially left Harry, an 11-year-old boy, alone to do his own banking while he goes off to get a pint. It was super funny in the moment, and I was cackling. The Giga Chad PS1 Hagrid had no time for what was about to come next. What came next is the worst part of this game. First, you have to gain the proper paperwork to even get into the vault at all. Which, of course, you gain the paperwork by running around the slippery halls to grab a trail of scrolls under a time limit, because surprise, surprise, time limit. But the challenge here comes from the fact that whoever buffs these floors has taken notes from Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, because these floors are super slippery and clean. It's like skating on butter. But it's not the worst part. No, the worst part comes from the minecart. Not only do you have to do both that and the paperwork minigame 3 times each for the Canuts, Sickles, and Galleons respectively, but you also have to deal with something more slippery than the previously mentioned buffered floors. That, of course, being the minecart controls. I almost quit right here, mainly because it got so frustrating that my chest was actually beginning to hurt from the stress. But eventually, I pressed forward and got past it after many tries. This is a game meant for children primarily, and I am a grown woman who has beaten multiple Devil May Cry games on Dante Must Die mode. And I was having such a hard time with this that I felt physical pain and had to stop just to collect myself. Now, let's just move along. Just know, Gringotts sucks, and this is the worst way to withdraw money I've ever seen. Alright, so what's left? Then I could talk about the section where you run from the troll like a Crash Bandicoot level. Nah, I already did that joke before. I could talk about the battle against Malfoy early in the game where you aren't allowed to use magic, which makes sense. I imagine the school frowns upon students using magic against each other. So instead you're throwing firecrackers at each other. My mistake, wizard crackers. It's a simple boss. Not much really to talk about. The way Malfoy says wizard crackers is really funny. Oh, I could talk about the Filch stealth section, where the invisibility cloak can't be activated at will and is only able to be used when you pick it up, which is weird. It's an okay section. A little annoying, but it's pretty short. Sets a good precedent because the next 2 games also have a bunch of stealth sections for some reason. And once you get the pattern down, it's a fairly easy section to get through. Not much to say there. I think I've almost covered everything. I guess I could discuss the final part of the game where Harry, Sigma Chad, Ron, and Hermione all go to the Forbidden Chamber because they feel like someone's going after the stone, and that leads to the final act of the game. There are no save points at all during this part. Once you go down, you have to do it all in one go. First, there's Fluffy, who is exceptionally easy to take down and has probably the ugliest character model in this game. Just play the flute to make each head fall asleep. He almost never attacks, and when he does, it's super obvious and telegraphed, so it's super simple to dodge. 0 out of 10, the Cerberus battle in Devil May Cry 3 is better than this. Anyway, do the flute button sequence as fast as possible for the best results. Next is the Devil's Snare, which originally in the book was Ron and Hermione's moment to shine, and then was turned into just a Hermione moment in the film. But in this game, it's a generic boss fight for Harry to fight because he's the hero boy. You know, it's funny that this game makes the Devil's Snare a boss, since originally the key to besting it was to not fight back and just relax. At least in the movie, that was what you did. Oddly enough, them just walking over the vines after besting them to the next challenge is more in line with the book. Vaguely. The fight's simple. Hit the tentacles in order, then attack the main tentacle. It's actually really easy to cheese the big tentacle. Just rapid fire Flipendo at it and it goes down without a real fight. Again, I have the upgraded Flipendo, so maybe this won't work if you haven't gotten that at this point, but I assume you have. Next up is the flying key part, which is actually more similar to the film version than the book version, because Harry mounts a broom and flies after the key. In the book, all 3 of them got on brooms to grab the key, whereas in the film, it was just Harry. This part is basically just catching the snitch again, but with a key now. And I feel like now is probably the best time to elaborate on something I said earlier, which was that I think this game was developed without access to the final film. Because, like I mentioned earlier, this game came out the same year the film came out, which means it had to have been in development for at least some amount of time. And if they weren't given access to the film, then they probably had to default to the book to fill in a lot of the blanks that Warner Brothers wouldn't give them the answers to. Apparently this was common practice with games of this nature, and considering both this game and the film, again, came out the same year, it could very well be the case. Alright, so the next part of the trial is the chess part. This is the section that in the film and book was where the absolute legend, Ron Weasley, got to shine, and here...
I've defeated most of the pieces, Harry, but I don't think I can go on. It's up to you now.
Never mind, Harry once again takes over, and now you are required to do the puzzle yourself. Man, y'all are screwing over Ron more than the movies did. Now, the puzzle requires you to essentially make the chess pieces beat the shit out of each other, while avoiding them hitting you, because if they hit you, it's a one-hit KO. You can only move 1 square at a time, so you'll need to be careful. You could also look up a guide and get the most optimal routes, but details. That's actually what I ended up doing, because I did this multiple times, got frustrated with it after dying several times, and just decided to look up a guide to figure out the puzzle and move on. No shame in that. After this, there are 2 more sections, which might surprise those that are only familiar with the film, because in the book, there were actually 2 more rooms after the chessboard, unlike in the movie where that was the last puzzle before the chamber with the Philosopher's Stone in it. Now, these 2 chambers are one where you have to use everyone's favorite lifting spell to get things out of the groggy troll's way, who, in the book, by the way, was already knocked out at this point, and lead him into a hole so that you can then go to the next trial, which is a watch the cup section that leads into a fight against Shield Knight. Upon getting the ice potion from Shield Knight, Hermione goes back to check on the injured Ron, which, by the way, both of them left Ron by himself. And he's injured. He said he was too hurt to finish, so you guys left your injured friend... We're not getting on this. This leads to Harry going in by himself through the flames alone. I find the Shield Knight section interesting, since in the book, this room was a potion-based riddle, and it was actually Hermione's shining moment instead of the Devil's Snare. But here in the PS1 game, it's another trial for Harry to solve while Hermione just sort of watches. Because Harry's the character we're playing, so the other characters aren't allowed to do anything substantial. So then Harry enters a room where he, thanks to the hooded man who sounds like Snape for some reason, raises some suit of armor to life that you fight before summoning a giant night boss to fight. It's a simple fight, nothing to write home about, honestly. Then the hooded man is revealed to be Quirrell, who immediately loses the Snape impression once this happens. I assume the game was trying to do the red herring thing that the book and the film did, but it doesn't really work here. It's just kind of funny. It's awkwardly handled, like most of the story in this game. Anyway, you chase after Quirrell into the final room and fight the boss after he reveals Voldemort on the back of his head. Hey, remember when I said that Fluffy probably has the worst character model in this game? Voldemort has the worst face in this game, without a doubt. Anyway, this leads to a 3-stage boss fight. First stage involves using charged flipindos to knock down pillars onto Voldemort while occasionally breaking out of his magical rope attack, which, fun fact, is another detail from the book that wasn't in the movie. I sound like a broken record at this point. The second phase involves dodging his green magic attacks while using the mirror to fire a big Kamehameha-like blast at him. The final phase is rapidly pressing square and then X when prompted to keep your health from draining and to damage Quirrell de Mort. Yes, the final part of this boss is just hitting square rapidly and occasionally X. Succeeding at this phase ends the fight and thus the game. You get the final cutscene and then you are forced to sit through a very boring credit sequence. A very boring credit sequence that you cannot skip. I tried. And you have to watch this before you're allowed to save. And that was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone for the original PlayStation. Overall, I think the game's okay. It's pretty dull, but it's not bad per se. I didn't hate my time playing it, and it was fairly short. Outside of the frustrating Gringotts section, it's a okay, solid ride all the way through. Its biggest problems are that it looks exceptionally ugly, that it tells the story in a very haphazard way that is probably the worst way to experience this narrative, and it doesn't really do anything to stand out as a game. It doesn't really do anything to make it anything more than just okay. I wouldn't recommend this at all for people that aren't already familiar with Sorcerer Philosopher's Stone. But if you are familiar with Sorcerer's Stone and you're mildly curious, then it's not the worst way to spend an afternoon. Again, it's not an awful game, but it's an exceptionally flawed one. I plan on visiting the PS2 version of Sorcerer's Stone in a later video, as this is planned to be a big retrospective series talking about Harry Potter games. But that's for a later date. I have no clue if I'll ever talk about the PC versions. Not too interested in the PC versions of these games, plus getting a hold of those is significantly harder than getting a hold of these. But it's worth mentioning that the PC version of this game is a very different game from the one I just played. Overall, I would say that this game is a okay but dull license game that shows promise in places. For now, I'm done talking about Sorcerer's Philosopher's Full Metal Stone.
Hey, you alright?
Yeah, just like a little lost in junk.
Expected that. You get like this whenever Mistress goes off.
Like, I have no idea what to even do.
Well, you have the freedom to do anything.
Hey there, ladies. What's good?
Trying to get Bimbo Brains here to have some fun while her goth reflection is off at ninja school or whatever.
Wizard School.
Whatevs.
I got like a totes fetch idea. Let's check out the artifact room.
Is that a good idea?
Lay off, Tentacle Boy. If M wants to check out Missy's trinkets, then who are we to stop her?
Responsible adults?
Oh, hush. Oh, this looks so cheap.
Careful! You can't leave any evidence that we were here.
This is so cool!
Why does she have that?
What are you three doing here? Ma'am isn't fond of us being here without her knowledge.
Well, Ma'am isn't here, is she?
It's her house. We should at least respect that.
I'm royalty, so I don't have to.
We're royalty, Akila.
I still have it in my blood.
I don't.
He wasn't asking you.
Oh my god! Guys, look at this!
A mirror?
Shit!
Oh
no! Aww. I'm such a klutzy ditz. But, like, I can fix it.
Can you fix that, Legally Blonde?
Like, I don't think so.
Hey, Babs.
Yeah?
I think we're screwed.
Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets for the original PlayStation is the immediate follow-up to the last game. It was released in 2002 and is an adaptation of the second Harry Potter book from 1998. As you can probably guess, the Chamber of Secrets film also came out in 2002, same year as this game. Now, right off the bat, a bunch of what I said about the first game still applies to this one as well. The game still looks rough with characters that look like poorly peeled potatoes, and Harry still controls like he did in the last game for the most part. All those comments remain basically the same as last time. Another thing is, like the last game, I'm playing this PS1 disc on a PS3, so that console's emulation leads to stuff like audio not always working or glitching. But the audio works more often or not in this game than it did in the last one. Like, there's actually almost no errors to speak of on PS3 with Chamber of Secrets, whereas with Sorcerer's Stone there were quite a few. Another odd thing about the game's graphics is that Harry and Ron have what appear to be the same models they had in the last game, but Hermione got a whole new model, which I appreciate since her carrying that book all the time in the last game just looked goofy to me and has always looked goofy to me. And you know, while I'm comparing this game to the previous one, I want to mention that the storybook sections took a massive downgrade visually. See, they've gone from the original illustrations like those seen in Harry Potter Tokinjo no Ishi to low-res screenshots from the at-the-time next-gen version of the game in the sequel. It makes this game feel less of a priority, you know? And considering that this game released in 2002, which was not only the same year as its film, similar to how the last game released the same year as its movie, but was also 2 years removed from the PlayStation 2's 2000 release, I get the feeling that I might not be wrong in saying that this game was an afterthought. On the plus side, the game has Stephen Fry as the narrator in the US release as well as the European releases, which Sorcerer's Stone didn't have. I may be wrong, but every single time I look this up, I always get the same answer, so I'm just gonna go off what I can find. The US narrator in the first game was Gary Fairhall. I don't know who that is, but that's who's credited as the narrator for the first game. I assume both this game and the previous title were developed with much younger gamers in mind, given how they have characters telling you everything you need to do in great detail. This makes tutorials drag on horribly in several places. And also due to how fairly easy and simple everything is, that doesn't make it much better. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it's not a bad thing that games based on children's books are made with those children as priority, but it does lead to the games feeling very simple and dull, especially for someone older like myself. Although, in the game's defense, I doubt very seriously they expected a 22-year-old woman to be playing this game, but that's besides the point. There are multiple aspects of this game that feel like improvements over the first game. Flying controls feel a little bit better, to me at least, and I think this game's broom tutorial is better handled compared to the first games. And my favorite aspect of this comes down to the fact that the game directly has you try both types of controls, and then you're asked which one you prefer, inverted or regular. And I like this. There is the unfortunate fact that this flying tutorial happens later in the game, and you've already flown in the car, so it kind of feels like a band-aid fix that doesn't entirely work, since the car uses the same flying controls as the broom, but the effort is appreciated nonetheless. Another thing I feel the game improved on would be the classes. Yes, you still have those Simon Says sections from the last game, but afterwards, instead of just using the spell you learned once and leaving, you're actually given a level to play through. And I like that a lot. Honestly, the level design in general is improved here quite a bit over the first game. It feels more explorative and much less rigid when compared to the last game. The last game's environments really felt like levels, like they were made specifically as obstacle courses for you to play through. Whereas this time, Hogwarts feels like a place that exists. It's not perfect, it still has several sections that feel very obstacle course video gamey, but like, it's nice, it's a nice improvement. Although I have to complain about the fact that Hogwarts itself has a lot of areas that feel way too similar to the first game. Like, they aren't exactly recycled from the first game, so they're familiar enough to where if you're playing these games back to back, or theoretically have them in recent memory, given these games came out so soon after each other, it can make it very surreal when you open the front door of Hogwarts in the main area that looks basically the same as it did in the first game, and then the front yard looks nothing like it did in the first game. That said, I can't exactly give Argonaut Games a whole lot of shit for this, seeing as how they had basically no time between the first game and this game to make this game. Something that's in this game that is a problem shared with the first game is the way the story's presented. Get used to that complaint, none of the games get this right. It leaves out a lot of important details like last time, sometimes even more so. And again, a lot of the important stuff is just kind of either waved away or forgotten about or kind of treated like afterthoughts or presented in the storybook sections. A good example of this is when Ron uses the slug throwing up curse from the second movie / book on Draco, and it backfires because of his broken wand. This section is interesting because they make a gameplay part out of it where you have to chase Ron and keep up with him without getting hurt yourself. The problem is because of the way the story's presented, you don't know why Ron's wand backfired. They never show his wand breaking, and they never present it, which, you know, if this was your only exposure to the story, you'd have no idea why the spell doesn't work. This game very much assumes that you're already familiar with the IP, much like the previous game, and admittedly the future games as well. And I mean, in the game's defense, screwing over Ron is something the movies love doing too, so hey, you got that going for you. Collecting the every flavor beans is different too. Not better, but different. Instead of each area having its own individual color that you have to collect a certain amount of to go get portrait passwords, you now collect assorted beans all across the game with no real reason to do so. You only use them to buy Wizards and Witches cards from Fred and George, and that's all they're used for? And once you have all the cards, you have no need to collect them anymore, and this game is just bursting with them, so you'll undoubtedly have all the cards before you collect all the beans. On this note, I still find it so weird how often the games focus on the beans. I mean, there's like such a non-thing in the movies and the books, but in the games they're like a predominant reoccurring element. Is that like weird to anyone else? Is that just me? Okay, let's keep going. I didn't really touch on the soundtrack before, but I want to this time. Jeremy Soule is the composer for both this game and the previous one. He actually does the music for all the games in this video, and I've gotta say, his music's fantastic at capturing the atmosphere of Harry Potter. And it's definitely a highlight of all of these games. I mean, what was even more fascinating was looking into Soule's career and finding out just how big it is. I know it's not entirely relevant, but it's without a doubt my favorite part of this game, so I want to talk about it. Jeremy Soule composed stuff for plenty of other things besides Harry Potter, like Secret of Evermore. Basically every humongous entertainment game, Star Wars Bounty Hunter, The Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events game, among many other titles. Honestly, it's no wonder the music's so good. Unfortunately, the overall gameplay isn't anywhere near as good as the music. Now, as I said previously, the game has aspects that improve on the original game. Like, I appreciate them taking away those tedious button-based minigames for certain spells like in the previous title. But now the spells work on Conker's Bad Fur Day's context-sensitive rules, which isn't a bad change on its own, but it makes the spells duller in this game because you don't have to do anything special to use them. Heck, most of the time you don't even need to think about what spell you're using in combat, as Harry will just automatically use whatever spell he needs to use as long as you hit the X button. And with the removal of those minigames, while appreciated because they weren't exactly the best, it makes the game less notable spell-wise when compared to the first game. I'm not saying I want the minigames from the last game back, but I feel like not replacing them with anything was like throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and I feel like we could add something better to replace the minigames that make the spells more distinguishable from one another. Quidditch is less prominent in this game compared to the last one. It's not as less prominent as, say, Prisoner of Azkaban, which we'll get to next, because it's still here. But Quidditch in this story is one section that's basically a copy of the boss fight against Draco from the first game. See, there was a reason I went on a tangent about that. It wasn't just me nitpicking. I saw you leave your comment. But yeah, this boss fight's basically the exact same. You chase Draco on a broom while you avoid obstacles, and you hit square to bash into him when you catch up. Once you knock him out, you fly through rings like the last game's Quidditch to catch up with the snitch. And then catch it. But catching it sucks now. I don't know who made this decision, but catching sucks now. I mean, it wasn't anything to write home about in the first game. It was just a press X when the snitch is in your hand and you're good, and you had to do it under a time limit because, as you know, these games were obsessed with time limits. I've made that point very apparent. But in this game, you also have to, like, move Harry's hand as well with this really weird first-person perspective thing. And I haven't experienced anything this awkward since I tried playing Grand Theft Auto 1 on the PS1 and found out you had to hold X to move. Dueling's alright. It's not bad, but it's not very engaging for me. I like that you can trick opponents into hitting objects that then give you super moves. But you can also hit objects on their side that give them special moves. There's some layer of strategy to this, but it's very easy and simple, like most of this game. Not much else to say, really. The FPS shooting sections suck in this game. Without a doubt, they're the worst part for me. I kept overshooting simple turns and would miss shots which would lead to me either taking damage that I could have easily avoided or losing time. Because of course, this part of the game has a time limit too.
It's not funny anymore, try different jokes.
The one with Moaning Myrtle is the worst one in my opinion. It's made even more annoying by the fact that that particular shooting section is following up the worst chase sequence in this game. The chase sequences on their own are simple. I mentioned one earlier back with Ron. You chase after someone and you have to make sure you don't fall behind. But the one that happens right before Myrtle is especially bad because since Harry is currently Goyle, if you don't know why, you don't know the story of Chamber of Secrets, but for us Potterheads, you know what I'm talking about. He can't jump and has to run across exceptionally thin walkways that apparently are the path to the Slytherin dorm, which only adds more evidence to my growing theory that Slytherin isn't allowed anything nice and are consistently treated by shit by Hogwarts. I mean, these kids have to deal with the fact that their dorm, where they sleep every night, is the dungeon of Hogwarts. But now, in the game continuity, that dungeon has a pathway that is essentially a walking death trap. Who built this place? I'm just gonna blame Ted Mosby, he's the only architect I know by name. You're probably tired of me comparing this game to the previous one, but remember that stealth section from the first game? The one that was a tad annoying, but after a few attempts becomes fairly trivial? Well, this game has one too, and it's worse. Because it's in a much more open space with inconsistent sight areas for those who you're sneaking around. And even a part where you have to hit a button and then make a mad dash to a door that you open with that button under a fairly strict time limit, while also making sure you don't get caught, all at the same time. To be completely honest, I feel like I'm running out of things to talk about with this game, because, I'm gonna be real, I feel like playing this game immediately after the first game was a horrible idea. I became so fatigued and burnt out with this particular style of game, because of how simple and dull it already was. I was able to appreciate the first game for what it was, even if it was a fairly simple, dull, but still good game. But like, playing this game immediately after the first one just feels like playing the first one again. And it's just so boring. And I appreciate the game for making some improvements on the first game's style, but that doesn't change how dull it all is. Honestly, I do appreciate the effort here, but it's still just a dull, okay license game based on Harry Potter. Again, this might be just my opinion because I'm playing these games as an adult, and this game wasn't designed with the idea that a woman my age would be playing it, but it's just how I feel, and the game just lost my attention. I don't have any really strong opinions on it, neither positive nor negative. I don't hate playing it, this isn't Mystery Mayhem, but it's not something that I actively wanted to play, and it's not something I plan on revisiting. I actually sold my copy of both this game and the first game after I finished playing both of them. I don't own them as I record this. I think this leads to my general thoughts as I walk away from this game. This game came out in 2002, a year after its previous game, which means the team behind it didn't have a whole lot of time, as I mentioned previously. And that probably led to the burnout feeling that I felt playing this game. If you're interested in this game and its predecessor, do not play them back to back. Otherwise, you're more than likely going to end up like I am currently, where you look at Chamber as just more of the same, and have this constant heaviness in your eyes as you just trudge through the game like a zombie, going through the motions of more of that same. It's not a bad game, but it doesn't do much to innovate on what came before, and it's not a whole lot of fun on its own, especially not coming right off the first game. Again, I don't blame it for that, and I feel bad saying all this, but I can't just sit here and lie about how I felt. Oh, and the slide section early in the game that you have to do with Diagon Alley's fireplace mishap is annoying as shit because there seemingly isn't a drift button, so if you don't already know the track, it's very easy to accidentally fall off and you have to restart the section. Not the end of the world, but it felt like bringing it up. It felt like playing a Boost Formula Sonic game without the ability to drift. Okay, now this section is done. Where am I?
What the hell, Emily? What was that?
Oh my god, I don't know. Who the hell are you guys? Why do you all look so strange?
Guys, that's a human.
I can see that.
You sound like someone I know. Wait, where is here?
Okay, Barbara, wanna take this?
Alright. Hi there. I'm Barbara. What's your name?
I guess that's fair. I'm Dove. OMG! That's totes cool. That's my bestie's name too. Bestie?
You okay? I'm Calvin.
Yeah, I'm a little confused though. One minute I'm just in my room back home and the next I'm here.
I did not expect this.
Oh, she's Akila. The blonde's name is Emily.
We're gonna be like the bestest of friends, I can tell.
How are we going to explain this one to Mistress?
Mistress? Wait, just what kind of world did I stumble into?
It's not like that.
I'm sorry. I don't see the point in any of this.
None of you were thinking about the full picture here.
What full picture?
History. History is important to magic mastery.
This is a load of bullshit.
One more peep out of you and I will rip out your spine and drink the blood from your veins. Now that we understand each other...
Ow, fuck!
This is a load of dung brains.
Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is the third game in this retrospective, and it's the one I was looking the most forward to revisiting, and now that I certainly have some thoughts. Mostly positive. It's the best game in this video. Just gonna get that one out of the way right now. Don't go into the comments thinking I'm about to hate on Prisoner of Azkaban. I promise this is positive. Mostly. Let's just start at the beginning. It came out in 2004 for the Xbox, GameCube, and PlayStation 2. The PS2 version being the one that I played for this video. There are also games with the same name on the Game Boy Advance and PC, but they're very different games from this one. Very much like a lot of games from around this time, where there were like licensed games with all had the same name, but were radically different games on their platforms. You know, like how the SpongeBob movie game, for example, was a 3D collectathon platformer very similar to Battle for Bikini Bottom on consoles, but then was a point-and-click adventure game on PC. Prisoner of Azkaban is very similar. It's also based on the book from 1999 that received a film adaptation in 2004, the same year that the game came out, as, you know, is tradition at this point. First things first, this game is a massive step up over the previous two titles. Visually, it's a definite glow up from the awkward low poly days of the original PlayStation. This is to be expected given we've now leapt into a different console generation, the 6th gen to be precise. I'm also going to be playing this game's follow-up, Goblet of Fire, on PS2 as well, but know that also had a port on GameCube and Xbox, as well as a PC version, but we'll get to that when we get to Goblet of Fire. In general, I feel the environments are better. Exploring outside of Hogwarts for the first time in this series feels like Hogwarts to me, truly. Yeah, it's a little dated, but it's got the mood and the look down. Plus, it has the added benefit of still having the soundtrack by Jeremy Soule, so it still perfectly captures Harry Potter and the Wizarding World's atmosphere musically, which, when added to the fact that these environments have massively improved, makes it feel like, in a way, playing through the world of Harry Potter, even if it's in a smaller scale than what the actual world of Hogwarts would be. Voice acting is also a step up from the last two. I mean, it's not award-winning or anything, but the direction is better, and there are less moments where I felt like a line was said strangely. That said, the voice acting is still held back by the fact that a good percentage of the dialogue is super unnatural, clunky, and reads like some of the most video game for children dialogue that I've ever heard. You know, that kind of video game dialogue where characters over-explain everything to try to make things 100% clear as possible to the player.
Hermione?
Sorry, I'm really busy at the moment. I've got so much work to do. But you said you had lots of trouble with Draco on the train.
Yes.
Well, you could have made it so much easier for yourself with the Expelliarmus spell. The spell book's over there.
Thanks. I remember. The Expelliarmus spell.
The story is, once again, kind of a rough patch for the game. It's on par with how the previous games told their story, although the storybook sections are gone, being replaced with actual cutscenes that are just being narrated over. The narrator, once again, filling in the gaps of the story that aren't covered by gameplay or traditional cutscenes. And like the previous two games, this game also takes aspects from the books more than the films, thus feeling more like an adaptation in its own right, as opposed to just being a licensed movie game. This will be the last game that does this. We've covered this ground before, I've mentioned it before, about how the games are taking more influence from the book than the movies, but I feel like this is the best way to approach these kind of games, as it allows the games to, in a way, stand on their own if handled properly, and feel like their own adaptation of the source material instead of just games made to coincide with a movie. All these games need to do to be perfect is to stop writing their stories as if you already have prior experience with the material, and they'd be good adaptations of these narratives in their own right. Too many parts of the story are just glossed over, and it makes the story feel disjointed in how they're presented to the audience. The game's story also has weird instances, like starting on the train to Hogwarts with Professor Lupin, completely skipping over the beginning part of Azkaban's plot while adding in new plot points like Draco using a polyjuice potion to trick Harry into following him into a dungeon, which is only added in this game to add a new playable section that wouldn't have existed otherwise. I checked, this isn't in the book, this is a new original thing. The highlight of this game, for me, is the gameplay improvements Azkaban brings to the series. For starters, the general movesets and level design have received major upgrades. Combat is better, with enemies that require different approaches and thus different spells. Spells which, by the way, require different buttons to use, and to equip said spells as well, which I feel is better than the context-sensitive spells in Chamber. This is what I was talking about in the Chamber section. I didn't want the minigame stuff from Sorcerer's Stone back, but I wanted something to replace it that made the unique spells feel different from each other. Puzzle design has also received a major upgrade, with unique challenges that require you to utilize different spells, and also the individual skills of the 3-player characters. That's right, everybody. You don't just play as Harry Potter in this Harry Potter video game. You can also play as Hermione, and even the legend himself, Ron Weasley, the absolute Chad unit. Each of these three have their own unique skills and spells, meaning the fact that you can play as all three of them is not just a nice cosmetic change, but actually has purpose, and it allows the gameplay to kind of convey their different personalities and skill sets through gameplay, which I like. Harry, the title character, is the most agile as he can jump gaps his friends can't. In the same way that he could jump gaps in the previous games, you know, that Link from Legend of Zelda type jump. He can also climb ropes to reach areas his friends can't too, which makes sense. If you were living the life Harry Potter lived, you'd be very athletic too. Ron, the legendary Sigma male himself, is the most observant of the trio. He can find secret passages, search through bookshelves and the like for items like potions, and he can use magical gadgets like dung bombs, which are needed all of 2 times in the game, but when you need them, you need them. Hermione, the studious witch, can crawl through tight spaces that Potter and Weasley can't, as they aren't as small as her. Granger is a perfect segue for talking about the spells as, out of the 3 of them, she has the most spells in her arsenal, which is very in character. I like that. All 3 of them have Flipendo and Expelliarmus, with Flipendo shocking no one by being your basic attack spell, and Expelliarmus existing as a reflect spell that can be used to send enemy attacks flying back at the caster instead of hitting you. Kinda like the counter move in Metroid Dread, but not as fast. From there, every spell is only usable by one character. Glacius is the ice spell only Hermione can use, where she does her best Sub-Zero impression. It's used to put out the fire on salamanders so you can attack them, as well as freezing water for various puzzles related to the purpose of freezing water, such as creating blocks of ice or creating platforms out of waterfalls. It's also used during a fight against a boss that I can only describe as the guard armor from Kingdom Hearts, but on fire. Lumis Duo, a spell used only by Ron in this game, casts a beam of light that can be used in light-related puzzles as well as to make the ghost enemies appear vulnerable. You know, the ghost enemies. Fuck, what are they called? One sec. Oh, fuck. Okay, that's not the right one. Is this one right? No, that's the wrong one. No, that's not right. There they are. Hinky Punk. They're called Hinky Punks. Carpe Retractum, a Harry exclusive spell, since I guess the Belmont family has some connection to the Potter family, is a spell used by Harry as a magical grabbing whip, which he can use to pull things towards him like Scorpion, and fling himself towards things as well. It reminds me a lot of the Devil Bringer from Devil May Cry 4, and the Soul Robber from Oogie's Revenge. Except, unlike those two, you can't use it as a weapon, but you can use Carpe Retractum in combat if an enemy has a shield to de-shield themselves. There's even a boss in this game that makes full use of the whole de-shielding mechanic. Draconforce, which I'm pretty sure I'm saying wrong, is a Hermione spell. Another one, which allows her to give life to dragon statues so that they can breathe fire and then dip once their job is done. It's a very situational spell and is only used for puzzles, no combat use to speak of. And then, of course, is the iconic, amazing, everyone loves, perfect quote to sample in your dubstep remix, Expecto Patronum, which is a Harry exclusive spell that is the only thing in your arsenal that can combat Dementors. The way it's used is odd to me, because once you cast the spell, you have to drive the spell blast towards its target, like those remote control bubble missiles from Battle for Bikini Bottom. It's very hit or miss how well it controls though, so keep that in mind. Reparo, another Hermione exclusive spell, is used to fix broken things, which are usually crates in the case of this game, that you can then use to press down switches and as platforms to climb. Funny enough, it's not listed in the spells section of this game's page on the Potter Wiki, which I had to use to get some of these names. Speaking of the wiki, there's apparently another Hermione spell in this game called Snuffleforce? Snuffleforce? I don't know if I'm saying that right. That turns books into mice. It's the only optional spell in this game, and is probably why I completely missed it. You get it from Fred and George, who are absolutely two of the best characters in the series, by the way, and I assume they sell it from you. I didn't go back to check and see how you got it. Now, with the unique skills of Harry, Ron, and Hermione alongside their exclusive spells, the game makes use of its playable characters quite well in the gameplay aspect, which is definitely this game's strongest feature in my opinion, though even the gameplay has faults. It's very menu heavy due to the fact that you can only have 2 spells equipped at a time, since what is circle on PS2 is used to switch characters, and X is used to interact, so that only leaves you square and triangle for spells. Also, unfortunately, items have to be assigned to one of these buttons as well, and you can't use potions in the menus. You have to equip them and then use them out of the menus, meaning you have to place an item in one of your spell slots, which makes the game way more menu-centric than I feel it should be, especially considering how slow it makes the game feel, especially in the later areas of the game when you actually start needing to use items. Speaking of items, only the person who picks up an item can use it. So if you pick up some potions as Hermione, then you can't use those same potions as Harry or Ron because they don't share the same pocket space, which does make sense. But it made that one area with the Dementor where you get the Expecto Patronum really annoying because I kind of just kept dying because I didn't know what to do. And the Dementor kept catching up to me, and every time it sucks Harry's soul, it takes a bit of his HP even after you recover. So that was fun. Anyway, another example of the problem I have with the menu-centricness of the game has to do near the end of the game, where Ron has to sneak past 4 trolls to get himself, Harry, and Hermione to the Gryffindor dorm, and this is the only instance in the game where you have to use the dung bombs, which of course are used to sneak past the trolls as they stand completely still otherwise, and won't move unless lured away by the bombs. Thankfully, the room is filled with bookshelves so you can search through for dung bombs, as well as beans and potions. But since what you find in the bookshelves are RNG based, it might take you a bit if your luck is worse than Gihun's in Squid Game. I think the team behind the game did the best they could, admittedly, given they only had 4 face buttons to work with and they needed a button for switching characters. I'm sure someone could figure out a solution to the lack of assignable buttons, but I can't, and it just makes the fact the game has loading issues, on PS2 at least, more annoying than I'd like it to be. Flying controls are good. Unfortunately, there's no Quidditch this time around, at least not in the story. As the 2 times Quidditch appears in the plot, they're only mentioned and presented through cutscenes, which is an interesting choice, given how one of the main scenes in this book is Harry being attacked by the Dementors during a Quidditch match. A Quidditch match which, in the book, by the way, also featured Cedric from Goblet of Fire, because, you know, the book for Prisoner of Azkaban actually had Cedric introduced a book early. But you don't come here for me to rant about Harry Potter movies. You come here to hear me talk about Harry Potter games. So since the Quidditch stuff is absent, then you're probably wondering, well, then how are their flying controls? The flying car from Chamber isn't in this game. Well, Buckbeak. Buckbeak is how. Yes, the iconic hippogriff is what you fly in this game, and honestly, the lovable creature is nice to fly. Only Harry and Hermione can mount him because clearly Hagrid needs to get himself another hippogriff who can handle the Weasley style. You can ride him around on the ground like a horse, but you can also take to the skies with Circle. You hold that button to escalate the height and have the freedom to fly around the area around Hogwarts. Pressing X hits the brakes, keeping Buckbeak suspended in the air so you can turn in a more controlled setting. And you might think you'll never use this, but you will use this. You will absolutely 100% use the brake, especially when the game asks you to catch things in the air. You only do that like twice, but you will use it. Overall, he feels nice to fly, and nothing about it feels bad or clunky to me, which is also welcome. I didn't even need to go into the options to fix that. He just felt good to fly from the word go. It does make me sort of wish Quidditch was playable in this game because, you know, with the flying controls being this solid, I imagine Quidditch should be the best it had ever been in this series so far in this game. I tried looking it up to see if I was missing something, but all I could find was stuff about the PC Prisoner of Azkaban, which, as I stated earlier, is a completely different game. Oh well, I'm sure I'll get my fill of Quidditch sooner or later. Sooner or later. Also, the PS2 version of the console game has iToy minigames. But I don't own an iToy as I make responsible choices with my money. Okay, that's a lie, but I still don't own an iToy because even I have limits. Bosses in the game are a mixed bag. The several times you have a magical tussle with Malfoy and his gang aren't boss fights. I don't consider those boss fights anyway. They only happen a few times in the course of the story, and they're basically dueling matches. The fight against Peeves is stupid easy. Just wait for him to stop being... so you can hit him with a spell and eventually beat him. Goodbye, Peeves. You stop being in the games after this. There are only really 3 bosses that I feel are worth noting. Those being the previously mentioned guard armor from Kingdom Hearts, the spinning knight boss that makes me think of those Komodo brothers from Crash 2, who in this game is where the de-shielding boss I mentioned earlier comes in. That's them. And the final Dementor swarm you fight against at the end of the game. With the guard armor boss, he's essentially this massive living cauldron on fire, and you need to use Hermione to Glacius his ass and defeat him, all while dodging his attacks. Similarly, the Komodo Knights have you, as Harry this time, using Carpe Retractum to pull away their shields to lower their defense. Once their defense is lowered, they get equipped with swords, and you can then pull off the head and finish the fight. Both of these fights have utilized the new spell that you just gained in this dungeon, very Zelda-like in nature. Much like the dungeons themselves, which you're always sent into by the teacher picking Sora, Kyrie, and Harry, Hermione, and Ron out of everyone in the class. And then you 3 have to make your way through dangerous dungeons that could get you killed to retrieve these spells for those teachers. At least you get to keep the spells, that's nice. These dungeons have you solving puzzles with the skills and spells you have. It reminds me a lot of Zelda dungeon design, as I previously mentioned. Harry's jump only activating when you run off the edge of a cliff doesn't make this comparison any less obvious. And these dungeons ending with bosses that have you use the newly acquired spell is also very Zelda-like. Weirdly enough, this makes me think about how Nintendo tried to acquire the franchise rights to Harry Potter before they were eventually picked up by Warner Brothers. Makes me wonder what Nintendo's Harry Potter games would have been like, and how different this video series would have been if they actually were able to work out a deal. I imagine they'd probably be very Zelda-like since they probably would have started on the N64 before moving over to the GameCube and the Wii. Huh, really makes you think. Really makes you ponder the question, what if? Oh, and side note, but if Nintendo owned Harry Potter as a franchise, Harry would have undoubtedly been in Smash Brothers. Alright, now that I planted that visual in your head, I should get back on track. I previously already mentioned level design, but I really appreciate how Azkaban's levels feel like places and not like obstacle courses. The dungeons are fun and the puzzles presented work fine. I never found myself pulling out a guide during any of them as the solutions were always easily able to be deduced. The weakest part of gameplay to me would have to be stealth, like the previously mentioned Ron stealth section. It's weird how 3 games in a row in this series all involve stealth, and like, none of them are really all that good. Stealth-wise, anyway. There's a funny glitch in the first stealth section, by the way, at least on the PS2 and Xbox versions, where if you get caught by Snape, he'll just start randomly coughing and wheezing instead of actually saying the voice line he's supposed to. It's a pretty funny technical glitch. It's hilarious. I feel the stealth stuff suffers because the game doesn't feel designed for that kind of thing. A problem a lot of games that aren't stealth focused that have stealth sections typically have is this. Not just Harry Potter games. The game ends with that Dementor swarm fight I mentioned earlier. I wanted to save it for now because it's awful. So it starts with you pulling Sirius away from Dementors, occasionally having to shake them off by rapidly tussling about with the analog stick like a Mario Party Pro. This parallels the start of the game where Ron had to do the very similar thing for Harry. But after dragging Sirius a certain distance, you then need to push back Dementors using Expecto Patronum, much like the iconic moment from the source material. This section is very easy to fail if you're not careful, as Sirius can't take much of his soul being sucked before he just dies. With some luck and a few tries, he'll eventually overcome this final battle of Azkaban, give up Buckbeak to Sirius so he can escape, and then the game will be over, as soon as you talk to Dumbledore. I mean, of course, there's a decent amount of side content to do, including an optional spell I mentioned before, collectibles, and even some side quests. Azkaban is surprisingly dense, all things considered. It's not super dense, but way more than the previous two. Prisoner of Azkaban is a rough game, but a good one, all in all. It excels at blowing its ancestors out of the water in most aspects. And I think its biggest flaw, outside of those downsides I mentioned, would probably be the fact that it's not exactly technically sound. It's kind of glitchy in some places. But I still feel like I could recommend it to any Potter fan actually looking for a game based on one of these books. If you're looking for a way to just experience the story of Azkaban, please just read the book or watch the movie, because this game assumes you've experienced both of those anyway, or at least one of them. This won't be the last time I talk about Azkaban. I do plan to cover the Game Boy Advance game later on in this series, but for now, in this video, this is all I have to say about Prisoner of Azkaban. Also, doing some research, you might want to play it on Xbox or GameCube. Apparently it's less glitchy on those platforms. This is so weird.
You're telling us. Jeez.
So, you're a mistress from another world?
So multiverses are a real thing.
I guess they are. I mean, a part of me's always thought they would be, but we know so little about the world we even live in, don't we?
You're telling me.
Hey, Babs, any chance of getting this girl home?
Unfortunately not. The mirror was destroyed, and with no clue what it even was, seems there's no way to get her back to her world.
I don't see much of a problem. We'll just ask the other me when she gets back. I mean, what harm will come from that? Oh, you four weren't supposed to be in this room, were you?
Caught us.
Well, no hiding it now.
Seems like it.
I wonder what I'm like in this world. My house is lovely, and you all seem interesting. You guys pay rent? This place is like a castle out of Resident Evil. You have to pay rent.
Yeah.
Of course.
Because she makes me.
What's like rent? Alright then. Now, any questions?
Yeah. Is Flipendo a real spell?
Of course, it's a real spell.
Do it then.
Oh no, that'd be irresponsible.
Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a classroom.
Yes, and I question the school's credibility if they're willing to hire me.
I knew she was a hack.
Alright, you little shit, what is your name?
Albus.
Get out of my class, Albus.
That's every line I get.
What would that little brat know about magic anyway? Well, at least now we're almost done for the day. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the last game in this video. It's bad! Okay, don't cut it off there. I guess I have to say more than just, it's bad, so here it goes. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire is the 2005 video game based on the 2005 film, which itself is based on the 2000 novel of the same name as well. Now, I want to address this immediately. This is the first game to be based more on the film than the book, something that the previous 3 games didn't do, as I made sure to mention several times before. And it's also the start of how every other game in the mainline series of Harry Potter games will do exactly the same thing. There are several aspects pointing to this. First of all, the character models are now closer in appearance to the actors who played them in the films, as opposed to vague ideas of what these characters should look like based on the book descriptions. This is the first sign of this shift that I was talking about. Actually, the first sign to most people will probably be the fact that the game's cover features a straight-up image of Daniel Radcliffe on the center, instead of the approximate artwork or renders that previous games had, but you get the point. To me, this is a downgrade. I firmly believe that the movies cast Harry, Ron, and Hermione very well, and I like the movies. But I feel like this creative decision to take the game and adapt its visual style to primarily be based around the movie makes this game feel more like the cheap, licensed movie game you'd expect, and kind of takes away from the idea that this could be an adaptation in its own right. Also, the fact that the characters look like their movie counterparts makes the fact that no one in this game is voiced by their movie counterpart way more noticeable and jarring. With the previous games, no matter how good or bad the acting was, at least you could, not fault them for not sounding like the actors because they're not trying to be those versions of the characters. But this game doesn't have that benefit because you're literally looking at a character model that's meant to look like Daniel Radcliffe. So you expect him to sound like Daniel Radcliffe. I mean, that's not the only downgrade from Goblet to Azkaban. For starters, this game brings back the 3 playable characters of Naruto, Sasuke, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione from the last game, which is good. I love that aspect of that last game. But the downgrade comes from the fact that they took away the unique skills and spells that they had previously. Now they all play the exact same. Same spells, same movement, same everything. Also, spells have been changed from things you equip, like in Azkaban, back to the context-sensitive button presses, like in the PS1 game, Chamber of Secrets. It means we've regressed, not progressed on that front. Charms are on square, stuff like Wingardium Leviosa and Carpe Retractum, and X is for attacking spells via jinxes. And according to the wiki, none of the jinxes in this game are flippendo, but I literally could not tell since they all do the same thing, with the only change being what they do when the enemy is defeated. Only spell that has a dedicated button to itself is Accio, which has one purpose, which is to draw items towards the player, mostly beans, because of course. Man, these games really got a lot of mileage out of the Birdie Bots Every Flavor beans. I don't think I'm ever going to stop bringing these up. Blue beans increase the magic meter that, when filled, can be used to activate an Ultra Instinct time mode for the player characters, but all 3 players have to hit the circle at the same time, which means if you're playing single player, it just won't activate sometimes, because sometimes the AI just doesn't feel like pressing the button. Red beans can also be used to heal your damage, which would be more handy if it wasn't for the fact that bean colors are usually assorted in random, so you can't reliably just get health pickups. Chocolate frogs don't act as health pickups either anymore. Now they're extra lives, so you can't even rely on those. You also pick which character you play at the start of the levels instead of being able to switch between them in the middle of gameplay. And this is 100% because this game, unlike the previous 3 games, is very multiplayer focused, which is really weird for Goblet of Fire, a book and movie where more than half of the plot involves Harry doing things by himself with no assistance from Ron and Hermione. Like, seriously, is that weird to anyone else? Also, the level structure is weirder now, because now this game is 100% level-based via chapters. And not like in the way that the previous games had chapters, where they would divide the story up, but generally you could explore the same areas. No. There's no illusion of openness anymore. You're just in a linear level structure now, and I don't like this. It's not an inherently bad level structure. Plenty of games have structures like this and are pretty good, even great. But Goblet does it poorly. The structure doesn't work here. For starters, these levels aren't very fun to play in the first place. They all look super drab and uninspired. The only level that visually feels like Harry Potter is the clunky as hell flying level with the dragon, which only gets that accomplishment because at Hogwarts is right there, but that's it. Everything else in this game feels generic. Like it's just from any random fantasy game and isn't actually like Harry Potter. Spyro: A Hero's Tale has Hogwarts in it too, so this first Triwizard task isn't even special in the category of a game on the 6th generation platform that features both Hogwarts Castle and a dragon. If the levels feeling bland wasn't enough, the pacing of this game is shit too. See, you need Triwizard shields to progress in the game, and each level has several shields to collect which you'll need to progress. And unfortunately, the game's levels have no ends outside of collecting these shields. So once you get a shield, you're immediately booted out of the level and back to the level select screen. Think like Mario 64, where after collecting a star, you're instantly sent back to the hub area. But unlike Mario 64, Goblet of Fire is bad. Goblet of Fire is significantly more annoying, too, because of how long load times are. Also, it bugs me how collecting a shield doesn't get any sort of animation. You know, like how in Mario 64, when Mario does his little dance after getting a star. When you get a shield in Goblet of Fire, the game just abruptly goes to a loading screen to boot you back to the level select. And it's not even consistent, because there was at least one shield to my memory that had a collecting animation, but then none of the other ones get it. And since the game requires you to collect 3 shields to unlock each new area, you will be revisiting levels, which only adds to this feeling that the game is padding to make up for how pitifully short it would be otherwise. I was also worried at first I'd have to hear Moody constantly say, "Back again, eh? And there's still several shields to collect," whenever I went back to a previous level. But it only does this if you go back to the Hogwarts exterior. Nah, see, putting that in every level would require this game to feel finished. Nah, the shit you're actually gonna get tired of is Ron, and occasionally Hermione too, shouting about beans every other moment of your adventure, reminding you to collect beans like your life depends on it. There's only 12 levels in this game. 2 of those levels being tutorials and Defense Against the Dark Arts, and another level being the opening tutorial level. And there's only 12 if you count Moody's challenges, which are optional, so actually there aren't 12. So, not counting the opening level that, unless I'm doing something wrong, you can't replay anyway, the 2 levels in Defense Against the Dark Arts that are slowly tutorials, and Moody's challenges, there are only 8! There are only 8 levels in this game, 3 of which are Triwizard challenges, and the final level is just the boss fight against Voldemort. This means there's only 4 levels of the game that have Ron and Hermione as playable characters, while the others have Harry as the only playable character. In a game where the clear focus is on co-op multiplayer. What were they thinking? Honestly, I just don't know why they chose Goblet of Fire to be the first Harry Potter game with co-op focus. Since, like I said, this game is based on a plot where most of it is Harry in the tournament by himself. There's a good part in the plot where Ron is just straight up pissed at Harry, so he shouldn't even be helping in some parts of this anyway. Did you read the book? You legally have to tell me if you read the book. If any game in this series was going to be a single-player, Harry-only action-adventure game, then Goblet of Fire should have been it. It fits the bill perfectly. And before you ask, no, in the maze level, Cedric cannot be the second player, which is strange, because I distinctly have memories of doing exactly that as a kid. Maybe I'm just mistaken and thinking this game is better than it actually is. Either that or everyone else online, including the Potter Wiki, is keeping playable Cedric secret from me. And I guess that's gotta go on the Harry Potter iceberg now. Playable Cedric, do not research. Heck, maybe Cedric's playable during the maze level in another dimension. But I doubt that. Alternate dimensions. I believe in a lot of things. I am a vampire after all, but alternate dimensions? Imagine that. Although there was that one artifact. But as long as no one touches that, we should be good. Back on the review. This game easily has the worst story of the 4 that I've talked about today. The other 3 might have glossed over parts of the plot, but at least they had a narrator or characters actually telling you what's going on. Goblet of Fire just has brief dialogue lines mentioning little scraps of details, like Moody being the new teacher, or about the maze. But this story is the most incoherent the games have been so far. And if you've never read the book or watched the movie, you will have no idea what's going on. At all. I mean, I thought Goblet of Fire's movie cut a lot from the book. This game took the movie and cut even more from that to create a confusing and barely non-existent story shown through these motion comic style cutscenes that I'd like more if they did a better job at actually telling the story. At this point, I've essentially given up on the idea that any of these games will be good stories on their own without any prior knowledge on the series. Even the few in-game cutscenes that do exist aren't very good. They mostly just exist to show scenes that they need to show for level reasons, like Harry dropping the dragon egg to explain why the level called Prefect's Bathroom is actually a sewer level. Now would probably be a good time to talk about the trials, since they're the most interesting levels in the game, honestly. To start, there's the first trial, which takes the form of you, as Harry, flying on a broom. It's an on-rails obstacle course where the game asks you to dodge trees, rocks, and great balls of fire that are hotter than several fighters in Smash Bros. As you try to fly through rings of blue magic that increase your speed, and rings of beans that increase your score. A high score means more Triwizard shields. This level could be fun, simple, but fun on-rails obstacle dodging, if not for one major flaw. All of the directions are inverted. No, not just up and down, which is common, but Goblet of Fire stood up and decided to say, hey, what if left was right and right was left? And just rolled with that. Which makes the level more annoying than fun when it didn't have to be like this. We're literally one game off from what I consider the best flying controls we've had so far. What happened? And before someone in the comments thinks they're smart, no, you cannot change this in the options. I checked. There are only 3 options. Turning on and off vibration, turning on and off subtitles, and auto-saving, which you can also turn on and off. Which, by the way, 2 of those are off by default, vibration and subtitles. Meanwhile, autosave is turned on by default, unlike Chamber of Secrets, which asked you which one you'd want from the start. I mean, it's nowhere near as obvious when this game saves, and I actually played half of this game nervous to turn off my PS2 out of fear that I'd lose all my progress and that I'd have to play this game more. After a few more levels, the swimming trial is next, and it is boring. You swim around what is essentially a fixed path, and like the last trial, the directions are still inverted. And now you're not just moving about the level, but you're also having to fight back against fish monsters from the film. Remember those guys? It's not fun, and it's boring. And I genuinely found myself falling asleep while playing this part. After this, you have to get 11 Tri-Wizard shields before you're even actually allowed to do the maze, which is ridiculous. Having like a 3 shield toll is whatever. Bumping it up to 4 is okay. But going from 4 to 11? 11? Now, it's clear as day you're just padding. I feel bad for any negative thing I said about any of the previous games. Yeah, the PS1 games might have been dull, but at least they were enjoyable. This isn't even that. The third trial is whatever anyway. You run through a maze, avoid some obstacles as you find your way out. And there's a bit where you run away from the enclosing maze, like that one scene from Shang-Chi, on foot, and that's basically it. Not as bad as the lake trial, but not all that good either. The final level is the final fight against Voldemort, the ultimate evil. It's its own level, and it makes sense. This is one of the biggest parts of Goblet of Fire. After building up Voldemort for several books, this is the reveal of the main villain, the ultimate evil of this universe. It's so well built up and made into such an epic moment, poignantly made even more so by the fact that one of the first things we see Voldemort do is kill Cedric, the nicest guy we've ever met. It's meant to perfectly show just how vicious and uncaring Voldemort is. Even the movie did Voldemort's reveal so well. In this game, you fight skeletons for a bit and then hit him with a statue. No, seriously, this level is mostly just you fighting skeletons and doing beam struggles. It's not all that cool. You fight skeletons for a bit before activating a beam struggle between these two, and after that, Voldemort starts throwing around a statue of a Grim Reaper to try and kill Harry, because apparently Voldemort's as subtle about his evil as my measurements are about size. The best part of this finale is the fact that the introduction cutscene, where Voldemort kills Cedric, has some of the funniest voice acting in games.
Cedric! Get back to the cup! Now!
I'm not leaving you.
Kill the spare!
No!
Avada Kedavra!
And yeah, you kind of ruined one of the best moments of Goblet of Fire and one of the few really good moments of the movie, but at least you did it in a funny way. Like, the way he shouts Avada Kedavra is probably the funniest way that spell has ever been said in this entire franchise. Goblet of Fire is not just a disappointing game, it's a pretty bad game too, honestly. It threw away everything the previous games did and replaced all of that with something that just doesn't work and isn't fun, with repetitive gameplay, poor pacing, uninspired levels, and without a doubt the worst storytelling any of these games have ever had, all rolled up into one cheap-feeling licensed movie game that EA could just sell to kids in 2005, myself included. I feel bad for ending this video on such a negative note, especially since I know the next video in this particular retrospective series won't exactly get better. Goblet of Fire marks the turning point in Harry Potter video games, as these games shift from fun and interesting games that feel more like video game adaptations of the books into what are very clearly games based on movies meant to just cash in on those movies. Goblet of Fire was the first game of this series to use pictures of the movie actors on the covers, and every mainline game after this follows that example. From this point on, gone are the days where the characters just look like interpretations of the book characters, and here are the days of recreations of actors. Just compare the covers of Azkaban and Goblet. It's like night and day. I mean, I remember Order of the Phoenix being okay-ish, so at least I have something to look forward to in the next video. But I know that the next 4 games in the mainline series aren't really a whole lot to write home about. And these first 4 games are already an interesting progression. Going from dull but passable and decently fun PS1 games to a pretty great PS2 game that is only held back by some technical issues and a couple of design quirks that are more than likely results of technology. And then from that, we go to a disappointing, unfun, bland, licensed game, in the worst sense of what that word means. And that's so disappointing for Goblet of Fire especially. Because the story of Goblet of Fire is the turning point for Harry Potter as a character. Like, yeah, Azkaban got pretty dark, but Goblet of Fire was when Voldemort came back, when the greatest evil returned. It would mark the shift in the series that would take it fully into the more dark and dreary atmosphere that the latter half of the saga contains. A turning point like that deserved a game better than this. So much better than this. Goblet of Fire is up there with some of the worst games I've ever played, and I don't ever plan to play it again.
It's been hours and we still don't have any idea how to explain this to her. I can't get kicked out of here. Who else will let me and my dad crash at their place?
Considering just looking at your dad drives most people mad, probably not a lot.
Mistress won't kick us out.
How are you so sure?
It'd make Emily cry.
Damn. She makes a good point.
Sound logic to me.
Aren't you all her friends, too? I can't imagine this reality's version of me is that different from me. I'm back! That's what I look like here. You guys went into the artifact room.
That is correct.
So that Emily girl is a duplicate of you? Yeah, guess that means you don't have an Emily, which means you're human. You're not? Vampire. Huh. Now that tracks. I assume you can't go back home. Otherwise, these guys would have sent you back to hide you from me. Apparently not. Hey, you got any spare rooms here? I'd really rather not go house hunting in a dimension I've never been to before. Are you kidding? You're a dove. And this house can never have enough of me.
Speak for yourself.
Quiet, Akila.
So, ma'am, you're not mad?
Mad? I could never stay mad at you lot. That's like super duper cool. Welcome to the family, Dove. I'm Dove. Nice to meet you. Question. Is Cedric playable in the Goblet of Fire maze level? The game sucks. Why would I care to know that?
That wrapped itself up nicely, didn't it?
Seems so.
This is gonna be like so totally lit. Like absolutely cool and junk.
Hey, Babs, can you find a place for this?
I can do that.
Thanks.
So, Mistress, right? I can call you that. Only if you want to. What can you tell me about this place, this world? Oh, where to begin? Well, it seems I've got a lot of time, so don't worry about wasting it.